You are now relearning economics.
Welcome to the Relearning Economics live stream. Okay, so I've always done live streams with Steve Keen. Done it for a couple of years now, almost 3 years. And we recently moved the Steve Keen and Friends, previously known as Steve Keen and Friends live stream, to my channel, and we've renamed it Mr. Keen's and Dr. Keen's the live stream. Play on my last name, his last name, the K's, etc., etc. And that's still going to go on Fridays, generally at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 New York, 5 p.m. London. This week it'll actually be 6 p.m. London, 1 p.m. New York, and 10 a.m. Pacific time, so Los Angeles times, or Vancouver time, which I'm located in. But anyways, I decided, well, I kind of want to do my own live stream. Okay. Um, Mainly because there's a lot of things I wanna react on, right? And Steve, has the innate ability to talk, and I like that. That was the whole goal of starting that show, was to get him out to a wider audience, solidify his legacy going on into the future, and I think that's been a success. And Douglas is here. Now, there's another part to this. I think I might have not ticked off the notification um, button when I scheduled this video. So it could be a huge flop. But guess what? Even if it's a huge flop this week, I will try again next week. So, anyways, back to the story. That stream does well. It's great. We have guests. But I think I wanted a little platform on my own channel for myself. And somebody had sent in a video or emailed me a video on my Patreon. You can find me at patreon.com/relearning economics. And if you're watching on my Patreon live, you can come here, hit up the chat if you want. Same thing with on X. You can chat actually from there and it'll come up in my chat here, or you can come to youtube.com/at relearning econ and chat here and ask any questions you have. But somebody had sent me a video, one of my Patreoners, and he said, "Well, what do you think of this video?" And I thought, you know what? That would be really cool if I did some reaction videos on economics. Lots of people do reaction videos. That's the hip thing to do. The Gen Zers are doing. Don't I'm not quite young enough to fit in the Gen Z category, although I can pretend some days. I think I got the vocabulary to do that. But generally, I am a very old millennial. In fact, I'm pretty close, about a year away from being a Gen Xer. I don't know if I'm proud of my wisdom or my lack of wisdom. Who knows? We'll go with millennium. But anyway, so this person sent me this video. So I scanned over it, a link to a YouTube video, and it was by a Canadian broadcaster. So CBC. I live in Canada. And it was actually a show called About That. And I've watched it, many times before, actually. I can't remember the host's name. And it's got really good progressive issues, right? About, issues going on in Canada. This one is specifically about the American debt. So it's a Canadian perspective on the $36 trillion American debt. It was released maybe 3 weeks ago. So I scanned through it, and I just because I didn't wanna, like, lose the luster of watching it the first time and reacting to it, but I needed to know if there was something I could react to. Anyways, yeah, there's some stuff we can react to, and I think we'll do that, once a week. We'll go through something. You guys on my Patreon, if you wanna kinda key me into something you've seen on YouTube or a video anywhere that's piqued your curiosity, you think is misinformation, or maybe something you agree with that maybe you think I wouldn't agree with, right? And I'm more than willing to maybe check it out and do a video on it. You can find me on X too and send me that info there. Or where else can you find? You can post a comment underneath this video on YouTube. And the great thing, if nobody shows up for those first stream. It is kind of put on YouTube as a YouTube video, so people can watch it after. Um, but the only way I can rebuild my channel, and here's another story, my channel was originally a mathematical modeling channel for Minsky, now known as Ravel. And I've since kind of moved all that over to my Patreon, simply because it's a lot of work to model and give tutorials, and I thought, "Well, okay, there's something there. I deserve, a couple bucks a month, from people who want that information, and it's rather cheap, the tiers, right?" So I've kind of moved that here, and this just kind of left this channel in limbo, and I've tried lots of different things. And the one thing that has been successful so far, and only recently, is moving the Steve and Friends, formerly known as Steve and Friends live stream over to my channel. And I think, they're getting about 400 views per week. So, I'm definitely not going viral yet. But the thing is you can't just, do one or two videos. And trust me, I've had my YouTube channel for almost 4 years now and, expect, to go viral. It just doesn't work. It usually comes through consistency and consistency on the topic matter and consistency on the format. And so I decided, okay, maybe my channel can be a live stream channel. Maybe I do 3 live streams a week, right? Maybe a reaction live stream, um, live stream with Steve, and then maybe a live stream on system dynamics, right? So kind of a broad area within economics, the things I like to cover, and we can do that. So keep on. If you got any questions, put them in the chat. I'm gonna bring up the video I'm gonna react to. Let's see if I can do that. Looking good. Let's make this guy bigger. Douglas, we'll take your comment down. We're just gonna, see what this guy has to say. I'll interrupt, make my comments along the way. I know this is going to be about debt, and I know the Patreoner that sent it to me is of the MMT type. So obviously, just to sum it up, that's it right now. We're going to go into currency issuer issues, but I will always say, like, with MMT, there's a rub to it, right? There's a rub where I feel like they talk about the distribution of income, but they don't quite have a deep analysis on real resources. And this is where, like, Doug, the MMT macro trader, and we've built out this large macro model, and that model is an integration of both nominal aspects and real aspects. So it's combining what's the real economy doing and what's the nominal economy doing, and it's all the feedbacks are included there. So we have a deep analysis on both, right? Because you have to. And that's where economic modeling is ultimately failed. Mainstream economic modeling generally, so, like, the neoclassical perspective, which they just like to call themselves mainstreamers, um, they're focused on a pseudo real economy, right? They leave out money, right? And they call it the veil of barter, right? We all know, like, us heterodox folks, know that banks are creating money. We know that it's part of aggregate demand. We know it's part of aggregate income, right? So if you're not modeling money, you're not really modeling the economy. But anyways, let this video go. Here it is, and I'll kind of interrupt here and there. Bill, it's kind of ironic, isn't it, that this is ultimately there is this. So modeling with system dynamics, we model the structure, right? And there's a terminology in system dynamics, like the field, like it's study, right? And that systems are policy resistant, right? So you can build a model, right? And you can build in different exogenous parameters, and you can adjust those parameters and then see how the those exogenous adjustments change the endogenous behavior of the model. Remember, system dynamics is structure. It's all created by structure, and then it creates its own emergent properties, right? So endogenous behavior, right? And so you see this over and over, even when a highly conservative government comes in and they're going to slash the deficit, right? Ultimately, they end up just spending more. And there's nothing wrong with spending. This is what I always say: if the economy is growing, right? So, like in the private sector, obviously, then government spending grows along with the economy. Carry on with the video. So, some people there are saying you can't hear the audio of the video. This is going to be a huge problem that I didn't test. If you cannot hear the audio of the video, that's problematic. Um, and how would I address that? Let me know, if you did hear the audio that last time I played it. This could be a huge problem, playing the video. Um, can't hear them. Okay, let me try something here on the fly here. It's turning into a big flop. Um, let's see, and do something here, and we will stop sharing that screen, replace sharing screen, entire screen. If I try the window share, problematic here. Gonna figure out this solution. I'm a system scientist, so I know how to figure these things out. Stop sharing. Doing a bunch of fancy controls here. Okay, let's do another test, guys. Let's do a test. Let me know if you can hear the audio now. Let me know if you can hear the audio. Okay, could you guys actually hear the audio? I can hear it just fine, right? And I'm trying to maybe switch different monitors, and maybe it's, my sound card is not sending. Did you hear audio on that last go? Okay, Steven, not me, but the video that I'm playing. Could you hear that when I was just playing it? Thanks, man. uh, uh, I didn't hear the audio of the clip. Well, that's really so. There's another option here. Do this on the fly. Video. I would have to upload the video. That would be really difficult. That's unfortunate that nobody can hear the video. What am I gonna talk about if I can't do a video? Uh, so, okay, well, I'm gonna plan this out better next week. I can yap, trust me, I can yap, right? So, I'll summarize this video. Essentially, we have a Canadian, and this Canadian's really a smart guy. Like I said, I've watched a lot of his videos in the past, and he's going along the same neoliberal idea that debt, financial debt by a federal government is dangerous. And of course, a lot of us know that's not necessarily the case because governments are currency issuing identities. And I'll explain that. I'll explain that a little more deeply because so you get the consolidated view from, let's say, modern monetary theory, right? So the government and the central bank are, one entity, but it's a little more nuanced than that. So let's get Donald Trump out of the picture first. Jeez, that guy, I tell you. He is something else. I actually saw him in a baby video yesterday. I posted it on my ex. Boy, it was sure funny. So the interviewers were little babies, and the leader of the EU was a baby, and he was a baby, and it made it palatable to listen to the guy. Other than that, it's really difficult at this point. The entertainment factor's gone out the window. But back to the how governments create money, and why it's just such a logical fact. So MMT just simplifies it and consolidates the central bank and the treasury, right? But it's a little more deeper than that, and it's a little different in the UK versus the US. And I'll describe the US example. So the government wants to put out some treasuries, right? Go into debt, okay? Have a deficit, right? What they gotta do is have a treasury auction, and they do that once a week, and they'll sell different, maturities of government debt, and they'll sell them to primary dealers. What are primary dealers? They're financial institutions, and primarily, they are banks. What funds do the dealers use to buy these treasuries? Well, they use reserves. I like to call them settlement balances, but they use reserves on account with the Fed, okay? Roll that back a little bit more. Who creates the reserves initially? The Fed. How does the reserves, what process does the Fed do to create those reserves? Well, one, the longest standing one, has always been open market operations, and that's when the central bank monetizes some of the government debt. So what it's doing is it will purchase some of those treasuries in exchange for reserves, right? And that increases the amount of reserves. Another way a bank can get a hold of reserves is through the discount window. And this is a short term loan to banks from the Fed. So it's much like a bank loan of credit to us, right? So the central bank will create on their asset side a loan asset. And then on their liability side, they match that to the bank's the liability they have for a specific commercial bank, and they give them reserves. That's how reserves are created. So when MMT consolidate, what MMT is saying is that central banks in the U.S. state case, the Federal Reserve, is a pseudo government agency, operates a lot different, and it's far more independent than, let's say, the Department of Transportation or the Department of Education. If you got much of one of those left down there, so they kind of got policy. Basically, the Congress has given them the ability to manage monetary policy, right, with some mandates on employment and price stability. So the reality is, if the Federal Reserve is a pseudo government agency and they are the ones that originate the actual reserve balances, those balances that are then used on primary auctions, right? We'll get to this a little bit further, the difference between primary and secondary markets for treasuries. That means the government is funding itself, right? It creates the reserves, right? The central bank creates the reserves. There's a few operations where those reserves get in the hands of commercial banks, so they're created in that process, right? Usually through open market operations. Banks turn around, they have primary dealers that go to these auctions. They use those reserves and they exchange it for an interest bearing asset like a treasury, right? And then even with reserves on Fed accounts now, generally they're always lower than treasuries. So banks still want to get treasuries, right? They provide a better yield, right? So in that case, right, the Fed is always, growing the reserve base as the economy grows. Fed's part of the government if you agree with that. And there's arguments you could say it's not. I get in those arguments all the time, right? So that's how um, the government funds itself, right? It's no big mystery. And I know this video goes into a little more detail on the distribution of those funds, right? And that's the rub. That's the real big rub. And I'll add one other part that I didn't get into, right? Is the secondary market for treasury. So the free market people will say, "Well, no, we're funding the government. I'm buying these treasuries." That's on the secondary market, right? So once primary dealers get a hold of these treasuries, then even if you're a big institutional person and you participate in the primary market, you are actually using a broker, which is a primary dealer. They are the ones that purchase with their reserves always first in a primary auction, always reserves, which are created by the Fed in the first instance, right? And if you consider the Fed as part of the government, well, there you go, right? The government is technically funding itself. On the secondary market, well, you or I buy $1,000 treasury, let's say. We're not buying it from the government and giving the government our money, right? We're buying it from a primary dealer. Okay, so what happens is the primary dealer's a reserve asset account goes down, the treasury asset account goes up. Okay, nothing changes there. The equity stake is still the same, right? It's an asset swap. When you buy that treasury, right? What happens is their asset goes down. Now, we'll escape appreciation for a second, and we'll get to that in a second. Their assets of treasuries go down, right? And they're a bank, so their liability, and this is an aggregated, simplified view, their liability goes down, makes a so it's they're lowering their assets and they're lowering their liabilities at the same time. Equity theoretically remains at zero. Now, what banks actually do is they always look for some capital appreciation when they sell these treasuries. So they might buy low and sell high to you, right? So they have different denominations of the treasuries throughout times, treasury securities, right? So if they see an opportunity to offload some of those, well, the price they bought low and they can sell to you high, then they make a profit, that margin in between. That's the secondary market. The private sector, like you and I, and even big time institutional with your bank credit, you're not funding the government at all in that respect. So that's another big thing that I don't see. Another thing too, and I read a lot of studies on that. Is so the free market people will say, well, long bonds, they go in their own direction. The government has no control over long-term bonds. So like the 10-year yield versus the 3-month note, right? The 90-day note, right? So here's how it works, right? The Fed funds rate is by far the most important interest rate in the United States by far, even more important than any yield. Actually dictates yields down the line. So you got your Fed rate, and you got very short-term notes. I think the US, it's correct me if I'm wrong, somebody in the chat from the US, their shortest term security for US debt is 30 days. I think it's a 30-day note. Might be wrong, maybe it's a 60 or 90 day. Um, I'm Canadian, right? So I can't know everybody's note durations and bond durations. What happens is immediately the shortest end of those notes get affected by the Fed funds rate. So that's the policy rate dictated by the Fed. Now, the Fed has really good control now because they have interest on reserves, which creates a floor for those reserve balances, and they have a discount window, a ceiling, right? So a bank charging another bank can't charge more than the discount rate, because then that bank will just go to the Fed window and get a loan from them that's cheaper. And it can't really go lower than interest on reserves. Why would a bank lend another bank something at a rate that's lower than what they just earned from the Fed from interest on reserves? So it creates a leaky floor, as they call it, because not all financial institutions with Fed accounts get interest on reserves. So Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, they don't get interest on reserves. So it is slightly leaky, but essentially it creates a floor. and then you got a ceiling. And then the amount of balances in the system create, oscillations in between that. Night to night, it'll fluctuate in that band. But anyway, so it's really controlled, and that immediately is because it's the inverse. It's the Fed just buying securities. It's an inverse. It gives a price to short term yields. Free market types, vigilante types will say, well, that doesn't matter because look at these long bonds. They go in all different, often will go in a different direction. But there's plenty of papers and studies that show over the medium term, those will all tend to the policy rate over time. So if there's no permutations throughout the economy, those will just trickle back down to that policy rate, right? That is the base information for rates. That's what it sets, right? There are market conditions, for instance, the 10-year yield, where you'll see, okay, the policy rate just went down, but the 10-year yield goes up a bit. But it's bounded. There's like if you look at a system dynamic perspective, right, it's bounded too. So there might be a shock for it to go up, but there's like an attractor. If you look at things in like attractors and repellers in situations that where systems go around in equilibrium or they get repelled from an equilibrium. Well, in that case, something could repel the long yield away from the equilibrium of the policy rate, but then it goes so far and just gets attracted back in. So if we were able to like stop all things in the economy, most likely what we would see, let's say we set the policy rate at 2%. Okay. And then we have some sort of shock in the economy, some inflationary shock. And so we see the long rates go up for a little bit. And then we stop all things that are happening in the economy, but we continue time itself. You would see that rise up and then dip down and go back to the policy rate. And so really every security is controlled by the Fed through Fed operations. And it pisses off free market people, right? Because they earn money in the securities industry, and they can do that. I trade myself. I trade mostly equities, but I've traded treasuries, right? So you can make money, right? But I'm just saying that policy rate really guides it, and that's another aspect of the government funding itself, right? Through its the like operation of funding itself, it must by that necessity control the way it costs to fund itself. And I say these with air quotations because it's all pseudo stuff, right? So in that video, and I'm gonna have to do this video next week, right? Just to give a better explanation. But really, the issue, what comes up in the video, is the distribution of those government funds, right? We can't afford medical services in the US, and this video was a US kind of related video, right? We can't afford um, some new like interstate project, right? And the thing is there is a limitation on resources, right? And this is where the rub, where I get into a tussle with the MMT crowd, is they acknowledge the distributional issues of income when the government spends. If they're just spending it and rich people get rich, right? They do acknowledge it, and they acknowledge it in detail in the literature. They do acknowledge that there's the limitations of resources, so if they spend too much, it's inflationary. They don't really go deep into it, even in the deepest of literature, and anything that does go really deep into that starts using mainstream conventional analysis, right? So equilibrium analysis. And I have a rub with that, right? And it's never as simple. This is where I'm going to side with the Austrians here. It's never as simple as there's idle resources, they're not being used, people are unemployed, therefore we can spend and employ those people, utilize those idle resources so more people have stuff to consume. It's not remotely that easy, right? You have to think about the biggest factor in government spending, and that's actually procuring the resources, right? So it's a long process of so usually government projects are big, intensive projects. So we're not looking at the government to buy a pencil, right? We're not just looking at the government to get somebody to go dig a ditch and make money. Looking at procuring the resources for a big project. And most resources in the United States, the inputs come from abroad, right? And that's the problematic aspect, right? Because the US dollar is a reserve currency, kind of works out for the states because that dollar's traded internationally so they can procure like resources from abroad with their dollar. Great stuff, right? But there's still like contracts that have to happen. So like in the US, getting a government contract, and this is the same in Canada, getting a government contract, that's a golden thing for a small business, right? So I ran a trucking company when I was in my 20s. And there was this one time we were doing the 2010 Olympics, and there were some government contracts out to move things, right? These are golden ticket you knew it was a payday. As soon as you sign that contract, whether the funds were in your account, that literally that contract was leverage. You could go to the bank, right, with that and say, "This is the contract I have with the government," right? Like it's pay, right? It's money. And those are sought after. But there are other realities when you get into areas where the inputs to products that you're trying to source domestically come from abroad, right? And that's very, very problematic because then you don't know what you're really funding, right? So there could be security issues, right? There could be distributional issues. So what you might think you're funding your own domestic economy, but you're really funding another economy, right? And that all you're really funding is that business and its few employees, and there's no multiplier effect, right? I really wish I could play this video. Let me try. Let me try something here, guys. Um, is there any questions here? What do we got? Well, we got Douglas laughing at me. Thanks. Appreciate that. What else do we hear? This is the shortest teenage or 4 weeks. Okay, so I was right. 30 day. 30 day is the shortest one. That's what I thought, right? There's so many durations. I think it's 30, 60, 90, 180, and then we get into the 1 year treasury, 2 year treasury, 3 year. I think it's got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, up to 10, and then it goes 20, then 30. Maybe Trump will bring out like a big, beautiful 100-year or 200-year bond. That would solve a lot of problems about turnover, wouldn't it? Right? Okay, well, thanks, Reading Dave, for confirming that. I want to see if there's a way. So I used to be able to do this. So like I can load videos, but this means I would have to download the video. And that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm looking at other opportunities here. Screen. Oh, okay. Let me try this. Let me try this. Tell me if you can hear this. Could you guys hear the video there when I was playing it? I think I was doing it the wrong way in my streaming software. Just let me know in the chat because if we can do that, we can play the video and we can go back to my original plan. Nope, we cannot hear it. So if I press play, that's nobody can hear it. Nope, but he's on mute, but I like it. Steve's in the house. Steve, so Steve, if you're just joining in, buddy, what I was gonna try to do on this live stream to kind of get the channel going again, it would be a live stream channel, is I'd react live to videos. Unfortunately, the Restream software is making it rather impossible for me to do that. And I'm wondering if it's because I'm on dual screens here. Um, And that's unfortunate. I know a few people are saying, "Let's just do subtitles," but that's kinda lame, don't you think? Like, as a systems guy should be able to figure this out, and right now, we've got still pictures of bald people and Donald Trump. It's turning into a really good live stream, guys. No sound yet. Douglas is confirmed. Douglas is our number 1 expert on giving replies, Douglas. Thank you. Appreciate that. I can try a few more things. I've got another idea. Um, let's see if we can just kind of move things, and then yeah, that wouldn't work either. Okay, so I don't know if that might have worked. It's hard to um, figure out my mic. It's hard to hear. Maybe you have a mic pickup. I don't know. Like probably really too loud. It'll be loud for everybody else if I turn this up. But what an unfortunate situation. I can't play clips of Donald Trump on Restream. Um, but it still goes back to the original point. So I'll figure this out for next week. This guy looks okay. He's better looking than Donald Trump, but we'll stop sharing for now. We'll go back to the point, right? Those are the complications with government spending because you have to remember, we can treat, government spending as a part of aggregate demand. It actually has to be efficient, right, for the domestic economy, right? So MMT highlights that. I just don't think they do a deep analysis. And that's where, modeling um, this sort of stuff where you're actually modeling like nominal aspects. So, price appreciation of a currency and the real underlying assets that are driving the economic cycle underneath are very important. What we could do low bar. I don't know how to test this, Steve. Because I'm live right now. I don't know how to test this. This is kind of like you were doing a stream when I was over in Alberta, Canada. So, Steve, I'll tell you a story. So I'm in Alberta, Canada, Edmonton, and I'm enjoying my time. It's kind of like a little mini staycation here in Canada. And so I get a notification on my phone, and it's a Steve Keen live stream. I'm like, oh, okay, this is pretty cool. He's trying the live stream on his own. And he actually had a similar problem. He was talking, I guess he had a video. And so he had moved on from this video. And it was still this video. And he was talking, I don't know, what was it, Steve? Like 30 minutes. You were in a long discussion, but everybody was seeing this still frame of this woman frozen for 30 minutes. And so I WhatsApp Steve. I'm like, your video's not moving. And so Steve gets this message live as he's live streaming. So he starts swearing. He's like, oh fuck. And then he tries to turn the stream off. Stream's still live. And he's like, oh geez, I really screwed this up. He's talking to himself. He's still live streaming. I think he since deleted. I think he since deleted that video. At least I hope he did. And so, anyways, this is a bit of karma, Steve, because now I can't even play a live stream video on my live stream. Just so everybody knows, we're back Friday. So Steve and I are live streaming. We've got a guy that has really developed something pretty cool. Um, so agent-based modeling. This is so system dynamic modeling. It's a top-down perspective, and agent-based modeling is a bottoms-up perspective. Now, Steve and I both agree there's issues with trying to define macro with micro foundations. But what's really novel about what this guy's doing, and I think Steve was mentioning there's a few other people, is the amount of different agents that can be modeled now. So it's really going to be start getting interesting if you can get to the point where you could model, let's say, 8 billion people. right? With different, different ways they interact. Now there's limitations, right? Because you have to create the assumption what each agent does, right? In that distribution. But anyways, we're gonna have that guy on. It's gonna be an interesting show. Mike Radzicki is back on the show, so that's gonna be really cool. So the old gang's getting back together. So that'll be Friday. It'll be Friday at 1 p.m. New York, 6 p.m. London. It's gonna be a whole lot of fun. Probably more fun than this live stream. What I could do, what I could do for you guys is show I'll bring up Ravel created by Steve, and I'll kind of describe that process of the central bank, the treasury, and primary dealers. And I'll bring that up. Ravel. Trying to work this out on the fly. Next week, though, I'm getting these videos to work because I thought it was the greatest idea. I know through my OBS, I can get them to work. Wonder if I can get Ravel to work. Ravel is formerly known as Minsky, still does all the same system dynamic stuff, but it is data analysis driven. And can we pull this over to my other screen? We can. Can we share it? Let's share. Turn it on. We'll make it big. So what I was trying to just kind of show is that government. So like I was saying, MMT likes to consolidate, the Fed operations and the Treasury operations. But I never really liked that because how do you really explain the account, the TGA at the Fed? Like if it's an asset for the Treasury, but a liability for the central bank. I never quite understood how you could do that. Somebody said, well, it's like interdepartmental transactions. Well, if that's the case, even interdepartmental, you got an asset and a liability, right? For each department, you have to end up separating them anyway. So I never quite understood that. But let's say we we can name this, we can do fancy things. We'll give this a title. We'll call this the Treasury. Okay. And we'll open up. These are just balance sheet. They call them godly tables. Open this up, and we'll do an operation of a government getting a loan. So we can have the gov account. So this is the account that the government holds at the Fed, and then we've got bonds. We won't worry about duration, and then we've got the equity. So let's say there's an auction, a treasury auction. We'll call this treasury auction. Say there's an auction. What happens? And we'll name this T underscore A. So treasury auction. So the government account goes up. Okay. The amount of bonds go up. So I can go T subscript A. Okay, so at offset, it sums to zero. Your rolls in like in double entry book count. Any of you sharp minded folks out there, double entry accounting, right? It should sum to zero at the end of your column. That's what happens when there's the government is doing a bond auction from their perspective, right? So they release the bond, right? They now have a liability out there somewhere, right? And their asset. Oh, let's see what Steve's got going on here. Steve, let's go. What's going on? Oh, look at that. Okay, so let me hang up on. Yeah, hold on, hold on, hold on, Steve. Oh, that's it. You know what? We're gonna bring Steve into this conversation because he's just sitting there. Um, how do I invite? Um, where's the invite? Stop sharing. What a disaster this has been. I've got my coffee though. I gotta bring Steve in here because this has been a disaster. And I'll send it to. He might be able to join on his phone. So I'll just send it to his WhatsApp. See if he can join in. He can just come in on his phone if he wants. Put him in. And the main OBS, so I'm not using OBS with Restream right now. It's because it really complicates a lot of things. But Steve, you might be right. To make videos work, I might have to hook up my. I used to use OBS with Restream and integrated them both, but when I was just doing like guests with Steve, I just found it overcomplicated the situation. So I'm actually using the Restream GUI now, and it just gives me one interface. But that might be there's another option too, is you can load all your videos that you wanna show into Restream and play them. I just don't understand why it won't pick up the audio, um, for the video. Let's see if Steve shows up here. What a disaster this has been, but it's fun. I like a shit show when that happens. Zoe, how you doing? Zoe, do you wanna come on the stream? I haven't talked to you in a long time. You want me to send you a link? I got your email kicking around. I'll send you a link if you want. Actually, you know what? Since this is gone, like downhill, this is kind of like the American Empire at this point. Like we've reached the peak of this live stream about a minute in. Anybody that wants to come in, just throw up your hand in the live stream. And wait, actually, you know what I can do is I can just put the link in the live stream. There's a link to join the live stream if you guys want to come on. I know Zoe, you'd come on. Don't be shy. Thanks, Sam. Sam is on X right now watching me fumble with a live stream on my own. I don't know. Maybe it's because like when I'm live streaming with Steve, I'm letting him talk and I can run it and things are like in order. I don't know. But I was sharing how government operations work. I want to try to get Steve on if he's around so we can discuss this a little bit more. Oh yeah, how about you, Douglas? How about you come on too? I just put the link in should be both the X chat and the YouTube chat. Oh, there's Steve. Here we go. Here we go. We got Steve
Yeah,
on.
on my phone, mate. I'm having a wonderful time watching you stuff up because it's normally me doing that sort of shit. Anyway,
Now, but here's the thing: is I'm leaning into
oh
it,
yeah,
right? I'm aware. I'm aware of my fuck ups.
as am I, as am I.
I'm just gonna lean into this,
Yeah,
right? So my idea, Steve. I don't know when you tuned in. I was like, okay, I've got to find out a reason for my channel's existence. We go back in history; it was the Modeling with Minsky
yep.
channel, and I just did tutorials, right? And I've kind of moved all that to my Patreon now. So and for my paid members because they donate their hard money each month. And I don't care if even it's the lowest level. At times are tough for most people right now, so I try to save that like technical stuff for them. We'll bring in Douglas here. This is how I save my live stream is I
Bring
just
people
bring
in.
in a
Yeah.
bunch of
Hi, Doug.
people.
Hey, Steve, how are you?
Good, mate. I'm good.
And he's like, well, just I don't know how we'll figure this out. I'm like, that's what we're doing now. We're doing it live.
We're going to repair him on
We're doing
air.
it
Yeah.
live.
That's right.
Lay him down and do the operation on air. Here we go.
Yeah, so Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out, what does my channel do? And I thought, okay, well, it's been somewhat successful doing our live stream
Yep.
on it. And it's like, well, if I only do that once a week, it's not really a live stream channel. You got to do a couple of
Yep.
weeks. So I thought, oh, I'd take a crack at doing one on my own and react to videos because that's really popular on the
They are.
internet.
Yep.
And somebody on my Patreon had sent a really nice video of, it was a Canadian commenting on the US debt, and I scanned through it. I'm like, okay, I can react to that. That'll be a whole lot of fun. But anyways, that didn't work out. I tried to make a godly table. That didn't work out. It wasn't even showing the godly table. So, anyways, here we are. Douglas, we haven't talked since the winter time. I think the last time you were
Been a
on.
minute.
How you doing?
Good, guys. I'm really watching with bated breath. On Thursday, there's a huge hearing in the Trump tariff case. Very, very interesting. I fully expect to get his ass handed to him in the appellate court case. The real question for me is, and this is what I'm tracking right now, is will the Supreme Court have the chutzpah to strike down the tariffs? And that's going to be very interesting to track moving forward.
Wow. Okay. That would be fun.
Strike down the tariffs. Now, though, as I understand it, the only way he can implement all these tariffs is he's claiming it's a national security issue, right? So the one with Canada, I know specifically because I'm following that as a Canadian. We are a national security threat with our hockey sticks and maple syrup. So I'm assuming that's what the court cases are going to hinge on, that these aren't really national security threats.
You mean running out of maple syrup or having too much of it?
Yeah, that's for sure. And the language is very interesting, and it's very specific about what he can do under the statute. He could do something very short term, like, and I think the statute really does envision maybe like a 6 or 9, or like even a 6 month period, something like that. But the scope and the scale at which he's tried to do is just a ridiculous power grab. And I really, and it's pretty clear on the law. Now the question is politically, how is the Supreme Court going to treat it? So that's just the really X factor that I'm really fascinated by.
Mm.
What's the Supreme Court divide right now down in the States? Is it majority conservative right now, or majority liberal?
It's basically what 6-3 now. I think is what we're down to. I think
conservative. Yeah,
conservative.
Yeah.
That's a tough go then. Although I think there was one conservative judge down there that I found was quite enlightened and was opposed, and I can't remember.
Possibly Justice Roberts. He's been fairly he's been closer to moderate than the rest of the lot, I would say.
Yeah, and that's the way you would expect a judge in a democracy to work, but that's not always the case. So, Douglas, I'm sorry I brought you in this morning to watch my shit show.
No worries. That's how we learn.
See if you can get that. You're showing the window before, maybe. What you actually had up was the window, not the entire screen. Why don't you try sharing the screen and start doing that again? I'll disappear because I'm writing my lecture for tomorrow, so I've got to get back to doing that.
Okay.
Well, let's see if you can get it working properly this time. See you Friday.
Good to see you, Steve.
See you Friday, Steve.
See you, Doug. Bye.
Oh, you know what? I see what happened. Douglas, you stay on. You can be my person that laughs at me. Let's make our screens a little more interesting, though.
I just think we should get the Trump baby video and laugh at that. That's what I want to see.
I'm. Did you see?
No,
that
I didn't. That's why I was cracking up. I can't wait to check that out.
Yeah, it's on my timeline. It's pretty funny. So now we can see what I did is I had it on the wrong screen. So we got to the point where what is a treasury auction and what does it look like from the treasury's perspective, right? And so what it is you've got your TGA, the government account, which is an asset, and we're keeping this really simplified, and we got the liabilities, bonds, and we'll just say they represent all bonds. In the economy, then you've got equity. What happens in a treasury auction is, well, the treasury's account goes up with reserves from banks, and their liabilities go up here too, balances to zero. That's pretty easy to understand. What's happening elsewhere in the economy is we can close that and let's create another godly table. And let's call this one the central bank. We'll do the central bank. And in Minsky, I think I can drop down liability. And so that's so for the central bank, the liability for them is the government account, which was an asset for the government. So one person's financial asset is another person's financial liability. It gets a little bit trickier with non-financial assets. And when we got CB equity, we'll call it equity. We've got to balance this out. So without any corresponding assets at this point in the system, this is negative equity for the treasury. So it's a liability. Got no assets to offset that liability. So they're in negative equity. We go T underscore A, and that should sum the row to zero. So that's what it looks like from that perspective. But the thing is if we want to just go build, I got to bring that over. Keep forgetting to bring that over. So here's what I was describing a moment ago, right? So from the central bank's perspective, the government account is a liability because we have no assets yet for the central bank. They're in negative equity, right? So there's no assets to balance off that liability. So the equity for the central bank is negative. Now we can go to the primary dealers, and do an account for them. So we'll just name this, call this the Fed. We won't name it. We'll just big capital letters, the Fed. We got the Fed. Now let's do primary dealers. Primary dealers are banks. We'll call primary deal, and then in brackets, banks. Same thing. So we got our banks. We'll open up the banking godly table. And they got bonds. They're buying those bonds. They're buying those government bonds. And they're buying them with an asset that they have, reserves. Okay? We won't bother with initial conditions. And so this is an asset swap, right? So it's a minus T subscript A. You can use whatever letters you want. We could call this bank equity. If I can spell. I will say banks. Well, what are banks really in the business for? They're like private sector accounts. So we'll just go P accounts for private sector accounts. We haven't dealt with that yet. But anyways, from the bank's perspective, when they purchase at auction, is they're selling some of the reserves, and they get in exchange. Oh, did we lose Doug? Let's bring him back. Did we? We got him back. Dropped off there.
Connection issue, it sounds like.
That's okay. My end. So we're at the point where, you know, from the bank's perspective, they've participated in this treasury auction. The assets of bonds go up, their reserves go down. Where do banks get those reserves in the first place? Well, they get them from the Fed themselves, right? They're not from the private sector. They're from the Fed themselves. Well, how does the Fed give them reserves? Well, let's go back to the Fed. Bring up their godly table. Let's have the Fed do open market operations. Put up another one here. And we'll just call it OMO for open market operations. And let's say the Fed wants to buy some of these government bonds. And we'll go and we'll name this new stock account CB bond, and that's just bonds that the central bank holds that are treasury bonds. And we go OMO, so they perform the auction, and we'll have a new liability account that we've already defined with the banks and primary dealers. It's reserves. So that goes up. Now, if you've got an asset that goes up and it's got a corresponding liability, has to move in the same direction. Oh, OMO goes up. Balances the zero in the end. This has always happened. And I know people want to go back to the origin story of money like Austrians and stuff, but in the modern world, reserves are always created by the Fed and the Fed only. And there's one other way, discount window loans, but they're short term. So we'll just stick with open market operations. And in theory, this hasn't quite always been the case, especially since 2008 and then the pandemic. Essentially the economy, the real economy grows, reserves have to grow with it, right? So that's what happens, right? We go back and we look at those primary dealers again. And now see OMO turns up right there. But for them, it's the reverse in the asset swap. So now this should be minus OMO. So for the banks, this is not an asset and a liability. It's both on the asset side, right? So this is how it functions. It's a triangle between commercial banks, the central bank, and the treasury accounts. That's where MMT just consolidates these accounts into one. I don't like doing that because, like, from an accounting perspective, it doesn't make sense if it's a liability for the central bank, but an asset for the treasury. I don't know how you really consolidate that other than just dropping accounting altogether. And just never liked it. I like to show that process because that kind of gets at the heart of the free market folks that say, well, no, we're funding the government. And so what are the free market folks doing? Okay, well, let's create another opera. Let's say the free market folk. I'll call them that. Douglas, you're a free market folk, aren't you? Free market.
Modified free market.
Well, so am I. Like, here's the thing. I'm very progressive. I don't want other humans to suffer, but I make all my money through like my own will and my own free market operations. So, I'm somewhat of a free market folk. I just don't buy into the free market ideology. So when free market folk, this is the best name I got right now. We'll bring up free market folk. They got bank accounts. So that's an asset for them. Remember, we called them private sector accounts. They want to buy some bonds. Okay, well, we'll make a new asset, and we'll call them P bonds for private sector bonds. So now they want a piece of those bonds. So they go to the primary dealers, and at this point, the primary dealers to them are just banks, right? And they'll purchase a lot of new bonds. Now, they can also purchase from other people in the private sector, but that's not funding anything. That's just an asset swap between private sector individuals. So free folk, we'll call them free folks, America, buy bonds. Okay.
I'm just thinking of the GIF with the guy with the mullet and the U.S. flag and the hurricane right now. That's what
so we'll call this free bonds. Free _B, we'll say. So their bank account actually has to go down. So I'll put a minus there. And this is an asset swap for them. And so we go. So FB, there we go. This is the private sector as a free market person saying we're funding the government right in this operation. Now, if we go back to the Treasury, let's see if this is true from an accounting perspective. Let's see if we see that FB, F subscript B anywhere. No, we don't see it. And this is the Treasury. And that shouldn't show up in that one. I don't know why it's showing up there. But we don't see FB in there. That's because the private sector can't fund the government with reserves because they only hold bank credit. That's just the way it is, right? And it's always been that way. The only difference is at one point, central banks heavily like tied their currencies to the amount of gold they had. You had the Bretton Woods after that, where countries would tie to the US dollar. Of course, Nixon dropped that. But all the way through that time, these operations were in place, right? It's always been the institutions funding themselves. So if I could meet halfway with I'll stop sharing. We'll bring Douglas's big, beautiful face back on the stream. I'll make it bigger too. Let's just make it real big for you. Oh, it didn't make it bigger. I was hoping to blow up your face there. Didn't work.
Let's move the camera in closer.
If we could meet halfway between like the free market folks, as we're calling them, that's a really good name. I'm being very polite this morning. And the MMT folk, I'm being really polite again. The halfway point is that the government's operations of deficit spending are institutionalized. It happens through institutions, government institutions. So if you want to say the Fed is independent from the Treasury to a degree, it should be technically by just normal conventions, then fine. But you, as a private sector, in fact, like I like to think I'm a pretty good day trader. I like to get up in the morning and I like to find my alpha. But I know I am not funding the government if I buy a treasury, because I'm buying that from a broker, and that broker bought it from a primary dealer, or that broker has found somebody else in the private sector and I'm just doing an asset swap. I am not, I have no influence on that. It's already done in the primary auction. And since the central bank is the only one that can create reserves, and Congress gave the charter for the Federal Reserve Act, you could say the government has instructed the Federal Reserve to conduct, which they are the ones that conduct the bond auctions each week. They're saying, make sure there's reserves in the system so commercial banks can purchase our treasuries, so they can exchange those lesser earning reserves with our little bills, right? That's always happened structurally. Like those didn't change because of the gold standard. Now it's just not tied. There's no backing to gold. And that's kind of the gist of that video that I wanted to get into, is essentially, you're right, don't worry about the debt, but worry about the distribution of where that government money is going to in the private sector and the implications of that. And it's not as easy as post-Keynesians and MMTers would say, that government spending, there's some idle resources you can just spend away and the economy's good, right? There's nuances with government contracts, right? And like Canada, we can't supply all our own goods for our government. We have to go abroad, right? Or the goods that are being supplied domestically, the inputs for those goods are found abroad by those domestic companies, right? So it's very nuanced, right, on the limitations of idle resources. So the theory is, on the progressive side of things, post-Keynesians will say, we'll leave this out of the MMT realm, is that there's always idle resources. John Maynard Keynes, right, said anything, what was the quote? Anything we can afford, we can do. I think I'm paraphrasing now, right? And essentially what he was saying there is there's idle resources out there and if we wanted to use those for the public good, we can. On the Austrian side, there was a guy named Hutt. And he said, well, often those idle resources are actually capitalists holding those idle for a specific reason. They have a motive, right? And they might be setting it aside for future operations, right? So it's a nuanced, just because there are things sitting idle in the economy and you look at face value, well, that factory is being held there. Well, there's somebody that owns that factory, and whether you like him because he's a rich billionaire or a really, really, really like rich millionaire, so we're talking like the hundreds of millions of dollars, which I'd like to be. I'd like to just be a millionaire, like, $2 or $3 million in the bank at all times, cash. I'll take that. But anyways, I digress. Those people have motives for their businesses, right? And so let's say I was a semi-millionaire, I had a couple million, I had a factory somewhere. and I was setting it aside because I saw maybe a real estate opportunity, let's say. So maybe I saw that land could be developed into a condo, it would make me money. But on the post-Keynesian view, they're saying, well, that's an idle resource and it should be employed, right? And the reality is it can't be employed because the capitalist that owns it has other plans for it. So it's very, very hard to just say government spending. There are nuances, and that was the other part of that video I wanted to acknowledge in favor down in the States, is that there is only for one, your people have to decide collectively if that's what they want to do. And even if the people decide collectively, I don't know how the US Constitution is defined, but each individual has a right to their own property, right? And we have to acknowledge that. And so that gets into what's called eminent domain and appropriation of property. So if a traditional example of that is when you build a highway and you need to go through private property, and hopefully you get fair market value for that person, but the government bottom line is taking your land and taking your stuff, right? But that gets into a very complicated area, because if I've worked all my life to get a good piece of land, I'd be disappointed if I only got market value. Maybe I want to hold that land because I see value 5 years down the road and then sell it, right? And that's what Hutt was always saying, as idle resources themselves aren't necessarily idle to the individual that owns them. It might appear idle to the general public. And then you got to ask, that philosophical question, well, what's the balance between, what is good for the public and what is good for the individual and individuals' liberties, which America is founded on a lot more than Canada. We're up here, we are, Americans would consider us communists, but we do have liberal ideals too. We have private property, right? We have all those same things, right? But down in the States, it's very fundamental, right? And so that was the other aspect of the video I was going to cover, but that video never played. And that's the big controversy for today.
This time.
Next week.
Yeah. So I'm very fascinated, and I think this is one of the Rabble programs. I'm still trying to learn Rabble. I got to admit, I'm really, really behind the curve. Wouldn't it be interesting to do a but-for analysis? Let's say there was a reason we created the Fed to begin with. One of them, we got tired of borrowing money from J.P. Morgan and saying, hey, we're vulnerable to one dude saying, hey, the U.S. government, here's some money. Wouldn't it be interesting to say, what if we didn't create the Fed and model the alternative universe? Because I wonder if that would show the reasons why we created the Fed to begin with. And I wonder about that, because I've got friends of mine that read the Jekyll Island book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, like it's some kind of massive conspiracy, where the alternative is there are very good reasons we did the Fed to begin with. Very interesting stuff.
So I've always looked at that, and I've thought about building out models. Hell, I've even thought about writing papers and never get around to it. But if we essentially what you're saying is reverse engineer the question, right? And so essentially, if we remove what's the primary purpose for the Fed right now? The primary purpose, a lot of people say, is price stability, etc., unemployment, but its primary operational purpose is to provide a settlement system between banks. So if we eliminate that tomorrow, JP Morgan says, well, we're a huge, massive bank, and we can hold accounts for every one of the 15,000 bank branches of the United States, and we'll settle the economy for you. So now you cede absolute monetary operations to a private sector institution that can change the level of those reserves at whim. Essentially, the accounts you hold with them, it becomes the de facto reserve accounts of the banking system, right? So that would happen, and of course, that was the issue. Now, through the American history in the 19th century, you had banks that would have their own notes. So now you're trying to convert notes with one bank to another bank, and that was problematic. the settlement issue. That was the issue, is you didn't have a unifying settlement issue, right? And that's why they tried the first and second U.S. central bank, and it failed before. And I think it failed because of political reasons myself when I read the history books. But essentially, they could have worked, right? They just didn't have there wasn't the proper consultation to that early form of American public, because that early form wanted independence from large government, right? And so the idea of a European type Bank of England being in America wasn't very palatable to the American people, right? But I think, like, politically, the message could be put across that this is the American bank, right? This is stability. This is the American. This is the eagle dollar. Whatever little symbol you put on your coins and notes, whatever. It could have been broadcast. And ultimately, by 1907, right, they had come to that conclusion that they needed a third central bank. And ultimately, it comes down to there has to be an institution out there that the American public, the Canadian public, the European can trust to settle those payments overnight, right? And that's the purpose of a central bank, right? And then, of course, all the ancillary operations go behind that to make sure that commercial banks have access to liquidity, so central bank loans, or have access to a money market, so interbank loaning, right? And that there is an institution out there that will facilitate that, the Fedwire in the situation of the United States. And so I think eliminating the central bank would be extremely silly, and it gets to loosely into Minsky's financial instability hypothesis. So now you have a private interest corporation looking out for its own profit motives, deciding the level of liquidity in the system versus an institutional system that may or may not always have the best interests of every person in that nation, but we can say that's a better system than a private sector profit motive driven institution having that control.
It makes me wonder what would have happened in 08 without a Federal Reserve doing radical things to try to restabilize and re-inject liquidity into the system as well. I'm just like, I can't even imagine what 08 would have been like without it.
Yeah, that's a interesting so, in 08, quantitative easing, the idea of it was that if you put more settlement funds in the hands of commercial banks, they would create more loans. And of course, that opened the Pandora's box of some people believing that settlement funds can be lent to the private sector, which can't. You don't have an account with the central bank to get those funds. So there were errors even with an institutional system, but it begs the question: how much worse would it have been if J.P. Morgan was what if they went out of business? The Fed can't go out of business. It literally has got Congress's approval to stamp Federal Reserve notes. It can't go out of business. It could be in negative equity, which it now is in theory because it pays interest on reserve. It does not matter, right? It's about the if you could equate profit motive to a government institution or a pseudo one like the Fed, its motive is smooth operations of monetary operations, right? And in itself, it's not a profit motive, right? So it can't go bankrupt, but JP Morgan can, right? It is a publicly traded company, right? It has to be in positive equity. Trust me, you won't find many banks that stay in business longer than 2 days that are in negative equity. You can look at Silicon Valley, right? So just imagine if a private sector institution that was fragile during a crisis like that went under our settlement system. That would be the end, I think, of the dominance of the American empire in the economic sense, right? At that point, imagine what would happen if in the value of the dollar, America enjoys that privilege, and it's a curse at the same time, and that's a whole nother argument. But it enjoys that privilege of being the reserve currency of the world. Well, if the settlement system that operates that reserve system crashes, the world would be like, well, it's time. I'm going to look at the Chinese bank now. And of course, the Chinese don't want. They've actually stated they never want to be the reserve currency of the world because it restricts your domestic ability on monetary policy. But the European Union, although they were in a bit of a wreck over there, they would have thought, oh, geez, this is an opportunity. Hell, the Bank of Canada, Mark Carney, our leader now, he was the governor of the Bank of Canada. We would have looked at it because we're considered a second tier reserve currency, safe currency to hold. We would have looked at it and been like, this is our chance? Canada, the next superpower? Looks like we're the big brother now, right? It's just the knock on it. It would have been catastrophic, I think, right? So that's kind of my opinion on that. Thank God we had a institution, a government institution as a reserve bank. That's not to say they didn't make stupid theoretical mistakes like QE, right? And thinking that would be the answer to all the ills. But at the end of the day, they provided stability. And boy, isn't it amazing how the American political systems changed? So back then, you had Tim Geithner. I think he came. Now, Tim Geithner was under Obama in the Obama era, or was the transition between?
I think he might
Bush?
Even been there with the Bush before.
Okay. So
I think he held over. I think.
I think so. And so you look at that, you had the Bush and then the Obama transition. And yeah, the Fed positions kind of held between that. And they provided that stability in that transition. And I don't think if we face that same crisis today with so-and-so in the office now, I'm not even going to say his name because he doesn't deserve it, right? The division he would cause, even though there's a stabilizing, I think, I know there's hate out there for Powell, but I think he's a decent communicator. He's level-headed. He doesn't, go over the top. He's a central banker. And he provides stability, and that's what you need for a monetary system. And I just look back at '08, and I look back at that graciousness between, okay, Bush realized, okay, we got to do something here. If it means packages for people that have lost their homes, et cetera, and Obama carried it on. And through that was the stability of an institution that had no profit motive. And in fact, was bringing those profit motive people to a round table to say, listen, you've got to buy out this guy. You don't have a choice, and you're going to do that. And trust me, we'll be around when this is done. Right. So if you want those discount window loans at a very low rate, I suggest you
and not only that, you could here are your choices. You buy that guy, or you all are going to jail for doing this to begin with. And that's a whole other side derivative conversation. But by the way, Ty, I think we need to get some T-shirts printed up. Chief Risk Officer SVB, and we'll just have a nice picture of a chair sitting there. But I think that's one thing we absolutely need to
do. So we got to buy the T-shirts or buy a nice chair?
The T-shirt, the chair will be like a really nice office chair with nobody sitting in it, and that's the Chief Risk Officer for SVB. That's right.
That was something else too.
What an episode!
Yeah, that kind of highlights. I remember that, and I kind of digressing here about federal deposit insurance, right? And I had to tell a lot of people that doesn't protect your credit accounts with the bank; it protects their reserve balances, right? So if there's a run, and of course now they're silent run, electronic runs, the issue isn't the bank credit that a falling bank has, because they can just mark up accounts. That's not a problem. The issue comes to settling it. When a person goes to another bank, that falling bank needs to move those funds that are no longer there. So the what do you call it down there? The FIDC?
Federal Deposit, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation.
FDIC.
Yes, sir.
Yes. So they're actually insuring the balances that are on account with the Fed, right? And I always found it funny is you could actually eliminate that, and the Fed can backstop that. So that's another positive. If even people in the Fed were to drop their free market folk ideas, they can just ensure banks that never happens, right? And they did during that period. I remember a couple programs came out where the Fed was like, "We're just going to backstop them," right? But I believe the FDIC, you as a consumer can go to it and say, "Well, I've can't get access to my money," and then of course they will make sure that that bank has balances on account that can be shifted to a bank where you can theoretically get you a limit. I think it's $100,000 or whatever, similar to up here in Canada. Um, but that was another issue that came out of the importance of the settlement system. It really is important to have a stable one, right? And it can actually be used to eliminate things like a FDIC and just simply say, well, a bank's going out of business. That, an institution like the Fed can go to that bank, take it over temporarily, let it go out of business because obviously it couldn't operate in the free market anyways, but ensure that there's a set of settlement balances, reserves that people can withdraw their bank credit and go to another bank, and those reserves would go to that new bank, right? And it would really bring great stability. So in the future, if something like that happened, right? Um, Now the question is, would like Silicon Bank Valley come out early enough and say, "Listen, we sucked. We fucked up. We've alerted the Fed. They've made sure that our Fed balances are in order. Customers, take your money, go to another bank," and it would eliminate a silent bank runs altogether. Now, I guess that would be on the condition that banks would have to be honest, and I don't know if that's a possibility. Um, I guess it could come down to regulators monitoring banks, which I think they do a little bit better
Oh
post
yeah, I
2008.
think post '08 they've had I think they've done more for rectal exams than proctologists. Honestly, I really honestly do believe that they've been very diligent on banks to really make sure they're keeping an eye on what they're doing.
That was a great analogy. I still like to give like rectal examiners a little more credit. They're helping people like in a
That's right.
direct way. And I am getting to that mark. I think when I turn 50, I've got to go for a check every year. Um, Still got 9 years before I get there. So, but
Well, if it tells you anything, I'm 53 and I've never once done it. So.
Oh, well, geez, I actively encourage you to go get a doctor to stick a finger in your rectum just to make sure we
Yeah,
keep you on this planet as long as we can. Because I like you, Douglas. So
I appreciate that. I really do, Ty. I really
let's make
do.
make this as awkward as possible.
Let's do it all the way.
Let's I don't even know if Zoe's still there. Zoe, you should have came on. I talked to her a long time ago on one of my first YouTube videos. It was like 3.5 years ago. I was trying to be a YouTube interviewer and realized I'm not a YouTube interviewer. Anyway, she came on. We talked about I think it was banking regulation. She had a model. How would you use Ravel to model non-financial assets? Is it even? Yeah, of course it is. And so I'll bring up my model and we'll bring up, let's just see here. We'll bring up my very early draft model of Deep Minsky. If I can find it. Might take a second here. Stand by. Stand by. There it is. And let's say version 3.1. It was a very early version. Any of the newer updates Doug would get, not Douglas on right now, but Douglas, the MMT macro trader, would be extremely upset if I shared the proprietary advancements we made. But this one I can show, and I'll bring that up. Share screen, entire screen, share, get rid of the overlay, and we will go, let's say firms. That's a little complicated. Let's the representative household interface. So they have real capital. Is this going to be a good no, let's do the firm. So the firm does have real capital, and it's K subscript N. Okay, and so that asset is not held by anybody else in the system. So a non-financial asset doesn't have to adhere to the rule that if it's your asset, it's got to be somebody else's liability. That's not the case. Now, there may be mortgages attached to that asset, but those are separate accounts. That's got nothing to do with the actual real asset. So what happens in Minsky is you just put that K subscript N, input in your godly table. If you guys are going to use Minsky, you just would never assign it as a liability anywhere else. That's how you do it. So that's simple, right? It's not that hard. Now, Minsky enforces it because it assumes that everything's a liability, would have a corresponding um, liability to an asset, but that's all you do. And so, like, when you do an analysis, it'll show, oh, look at this asset you have was never assigned. And of course, as a model, you'd be recognized, okay, well, that's because it's a non-financial asset. So that's how you do it. It just doesn't interlock with anything else, but it still has to be double entried. So as that K subscript N, which represented capital for firms, goes up, its real equity column, it had 3 equity columns in there, has to go up as well, right? So it's still double, there's still a double entry, right? But it's not interlinked with other balance sheets in the system. And that's not to say that there aren't mortgages that are underwritten on that asset, right? And those mortgages would have an asset that would be the bank's asset and the loanee's liability. That's separate from the real um, asset itself, and that's how you model in Minsky. And also, you can put multiple equity columns in Minsky. So one equity column can represent the real assets that you have in equity, and then the nominal assets that you have in equity, and break it down that way, and then interlock your financial assets as other people's liabilities. And that's how you do it in Minsky. It is possible to do. It's just like, so if you own, and anybody who's watching, what the hell are you talking about? If I own a house, it is my asset, right? It's not the liability of the bank, right? Now, if I have a mortgage that I'm buying that house with, the asset, the house, the real, it's mine. So I got that asset and I double bookkeep it with increasing my equity. Then I might have a mortgage attached to it. That's a liability. Okay, so that's a liability to me. So that actually will bring down my financial equity, and that's where you get the term, what equity do you have in your house, right? How much is it paid off, right? But you're dealing with a non-financial asset and a financial liability, right? And it can get really tricky, but if you use a godly table or any accounting sheet, do some basic accounting, you'll come to the conclusion I just mentioned there. How much time? An hour and 30 minutes I've been yapping. Thank God you came on. Thank God.
It's been a joy. It really has. It's always fun, Ty. You really are crushing it with the modeling stuff, and man, this I literally do learn something every time you do a live stream. So I really can't thank you enough.
You know, I'm at the stage right now, because so when Doug and I talk about, the national model that we're always trying to perfect, we're still very hard to calibrate complex systems. So Doug, without giving away the secret sauce, actually made a calibrating software program to calibrate each variable in the system. Keep in mind, this is a system that has 100,000 feedback loops. So even for this highly advanced software program that he made on his highly powerful computer, it is a monumental task. But what I've been really trying to push, because people hear system dynamics and then they hear dynamic stochastic general equilibrium, and they hear the word dynamic twice and they're like, you're just doing what everybody else is doing. Not. So the dynamic stochastic model, general equilibrium models, so many words, DSGE models, they look for an analytical solution and solve backwards to get to an equilibrium. right? Whereas the system dynamic model, and I should nuance that they essentially, the model knows the future. Okay, and this is simplifying things. And the model assumes that every agent in that modeling knows the model itself, and i.e., you have rational expectations and perfect foresight of the future. And so it solves backwards. Literally, DSG models solve backwards in time. And the big ones, like at the ECB, when they run their big DSGE model, is massive. I read the equations, it blew my mind. I'm like, I can't keep up with this. They must be really smart. And then I look at their track record, and then I'm like, well, they're not really smart after all. It can take up to a day for their best computer to solve a simulation. Incredible. Now, with system dynamic models, they're path dependent, so there's nothing rational. It's taking past information, right, and accumulates in this stocks, and then it gives you a dynamic behavior, and then those stock accumulations at that point in time create a new path into the future, right, and it gives you behavioral opportunities to go into the future, right? So I've been trying my hardest to put that out there. In one of my last posts, I did that, because that's high level stuff. So I found there's a selection, a cohorts of people when it comes to mathematical modeling. There's the conventional no ones who laugh at nonlinear dynamic systems, either because they think it's fraudulent because they weren't taught those techniques in their PhD or when they did their masters. There's the other half of those people that say, well, it's just too hard to calibrate nonlinear systems. That's like building a model of the solar system. And to them, I reply, well, I did that in Python a few weeks ago. It took me about 30 minutes with AI. Literally. I'll show that next week. Literally. Now, I simplified it. I just had the 8 planets and their moons. I didn't have an asteroid belt, and I didn't model out all the asteroids. But nonetheless, it is possible to calibrate those models, right? Like, we have the computing power. So that's one of the arguments. Then you got the other argument that, and this is from the libertarian side. And I know you've got some Austrian friends. I've seen them there on LinkedIn.
Yes.
They simply say, well, no, human action says you can never model the economy because there's human decisions involved. To which I argue, well, Lotka and Volterra, who made the predator-prey model, which is used in like the study of biology and species, right? And the predator-prey model, they just put in the behaviors of a group of predators, a group of prey, and they can model quantitatively, like fish stocks, right down to 1,000 fish within that era of 1,000 fish. And keep in mind, fish is very, very big stocks of fish. And they do it fine. And so then you have to assume that humans are like omnipresent. They're gods. They are apart from all other species. Right. And I don't believe in that. I believe we've harnessed technology, but I don't think we're any more intellectual than a dolphin per se. Like, there's a lot of studies out there on dolphins that are hugely intellectual. They have vocal ranges of communication. They're like as intelligent as a human. They just don't have fingers to articulate things, and maybe they're deficient in other areas that we would consider a benefit. But if you're going to believe in that, then you have to believe that we're godlike compared to other species, and we can't be modeled in a predator-prey model. I don't believe that. I categorically don't believe that. So there's that argument. And then you've got the third group of cohort of people that just don't understand mathematical modeling, and they've been exposed to fraudulent ones that people like Steve will call out. And so they're like, well, you're modeling Ty, then you must be doing the same thing as everybody else, right? And so I get trapped in that I'm just one of those other models. So I'm trying to articulate that there are structural systems that use system dynamics or agent-based modeling, and then there are assumption analytical. So system dynamics, we solve numerically, we estimate through time, right? So we use complex solvers to solve each small iteration through time, right? And it reacts on the different stocks accumulating and deaccumulating. And That's used in pandemic modeling, biology modeling, all sorts of social system modeling. That modeling, mathematical modeling technique in itself is electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, probably 15 other different types of engineering, ordinary differential equations. Albert Einstein was eating those for breakfast. That was his bread and butter. So, like, what makes, and I go back to that libertarian, what makes you stand apart? What makes humans a part of the system, like separate from the system? How can they be like, that almost gives you a God complex, like, oh, humans are different, we think different, and we are connected with God. And actually, a lot of libertarians, they're very faith-based, and that's fine. That's fine.
Speaking of libertarians, how's your proximity today, brother?
Play on words. Remember, you're the one that's 3 years too. DSG models aren't stock flow consistent. This is correct. They are not stock flow consistent, but stock flow consistent modeling is structural. That's a good thing. Like I was saying, you have to add dynamics into it, and that's where system dynamics, all your stocks, so it shows structures and it shows the flows between the stocks. A godly table is a good example, but you can also just put it on the canvas, right? If they're physical stocks like human beings and stuff, right? Gotta have the dynamics that dictate the flows. What is the behavior flows between the stocks so they evolve over time? So when Godly and Mark Lavoie did a textbook some years ago, and it was a stock flow consistent modeling, but they used discrete time modeling to do it. So they were solving a solution, right? So stock flow modeling in itself is, what could I make it? This is kind of like when it goes to MMT, when an MMTer says, we are describing the monetary system. And I've often corrected them. I get in trouble with MMTers every day, just as much as Austrians, because correct term.
Hey, you're doing something right. If everybody's pissed off at you, you're probably doing something right.
Yeah, or let's say that. But what I correct them on is, you're not describing the monetary system, because that would involve time and continuous time. You're describing the monetary structure. So to she watches, you are correct. DSG models are not stock flow consistent. And so that's why even on that fact alone, we can kind of say, okay, why would I even pay attention to a dynamic stochastic equilibrium model in the first place? You're correct. But that in itself, stock flow consistent modeling is describing the structure. Its behavior over time is a whole nother thing. And that's where system dynamics or even agent-based modeling gets involved. Difference between agent-based modeling is, one is like a micro, so you're building from the bottom up. So in agent-based, you have all these different agents, and you create behaviors of each of the agents. And they interact with each other from the bottom up perspective, and it creates emergent properties out of that system. And that's great. I love it. I think, like in microeconomics, you should be using agent-based modeling. System dynamic modeling is top down, so it's looking at broad structures, right? And those structures interact with each other, and then you get emergent behavior, right? That's the stuff you want to focus on. System dynamics, by its very nature, is stock flow consistent, because so you have 4 elements in system dynamics. You have your stocks, your flows, your auxiliary variables, which is basically, you might have a ratio between a stock and another stock, and that gives you an auxiliary, and that might be an input to your parameters function that says, let's say, if there's less employees out there to be employed, wages might go up. You might postulate that that's an exponential curve. And as there's less and less employees out there, employers have to offer more and more money to attract them. And then you create a behavioral assumption that you should be measuring with data. You should. And then, so your parameters are your 4th element, right? And through that, you get your emergent properties, and you model that through time. So I will say that system dynamic modeling is discrete modeling, but in very, very small chunks, right? So like our national model, Doug and I, is every 16 hours. right? And so conventional economists, they say, well, that's useless. My data comes in weekly, monthly, and quarterly, right? So that can't be real because it doesn't match the data. But the data isn't reality. It's just a frequency of release. It's not reality, day-to-day reality. So there's that. She watches. I've seen you on our Steve and I show. Mathematically godly tables are well defined. I used abstract algebra to prove. Let's bring this up. Here we go. I used abstract algebra to prove this instead of calculus, I think. Debits and credits are like inflows and outflows of an electrical circuit, stepwise dynamic. Okay, so so the godly tables that we show on the screen, if you look at the columns, those are your stocks, and you look at the rows, those are flows. If you look at an ordinary differential equation, it's the same thing. So you've got delta, your time, and we'll use S for the stock over delta time. Okay, and there's your ordinary differential equation equals your flows. Right? So you're correct on that standpoint that debits and credits are like inflows and outflows, and an electrical circuit, yes, but they're not static. They're changing through time, right? So your stock is, let's say, if it's dollars, it's dimension in dollars. Your flows are dollars per time period, right? So you want to use calculus and smooth integration over time. So you know, okay, this is a time unit variable. So this is a change over time. And that flow can say, let's say $100 a year. And then the next step, it'll say $150 a year. And then the next step, it says $90 a year, right? And each step is accumulating into the stock, right? Based on other parts of the system, right? So I'm a firm believer in using calculus in big dynamic models. So that's what physicists do, and that's what engineers do. That's what economists should be doing too, right? Regardless of your belief systems. But I think I'm getting what you're saying there. You're proving that stock flow consistent models are the correct way to go. In that sense, I agree with you. I can't deny it. Stephen. Oh, Stephen. Real capital can be modeled. Use the stock as the capital, and the flows going influence the number of functions and capability. Going out flows are production when the capital is not used, not you. I think I get what you mean. I was just showing people, like in Doug and I's early draft models, how we deal with non-financial assets, so real assets, right? So they're very easy to model. And Steven's done a lot of that. Has been one of his focus is on non-financial assets. Steven, what's you got a Substack or a Patreon? What's the name of it? Is it like Patreon/Stephen Hinton? Put it in the chat. I'll plug you. It's good to see you here. What else we got here? Well, we saw Sam earlier. He's probably long gone. A lot of these people have probably given up, and then there's other people that are waiting to give up. I looked at the stats of live streams, even on when it was on the Steve channel. It's like people stay for 30 minutes and then they leave, right? They can only, the brain can only take in so much. And so it's funny. And then a new group will come in because they're late. So it's a whole new group of chatter. So if I've answered something 2 hours ago, I didn't answer it now, and that's system dynamics, emergent properties. Not used up 43. Yeah, but Stephen, what's your Patreon, or is it a Substack? How am I going to plug your Patreon or Substack if you don't put it in? And you might not be allowed to put a link in the chat, so just put the is it Patreon and then your name, and then I can plug you, I guess. People will watch this, and if you charge people, you can make money. I guess I'll do that.
Money is good.
And Douglas is what are you doing? Do you got your own firm? What do you tell me about that?
Yeah, what we're doing right now is we've gone through some changes. We were looking at doing hard money lending, actually, which is on the real estate side. We're kind of pivoting now. my heart of heart is to be a real estate developer, actually. So the timing might be really, really, really horrendously bad, or it's really, really good. I don't know yet. Ask me in about 3 years. But we really have pivoted more to the real estate ground up side, and but for sure the economics and what you guys have been working on is just like a passion project, and just being involved in this conversation period. I really am really grateful, sincerely.
You got a website? What's the website again?
Yeah. Eagles Flight Equity Group has that. I think actually LinkedIn is the best way to find me. Douglas Dow JD is probably the best bet.
Find him on LinkedIn.
Yes, sir.
Douglas Dow JD. What is it again?
Juris Doctorate. Yeah, for the law degree. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can find it. Just type in, you can find anybody on social media now. We're all doxing each other on a daily basis.
That's right.
Oh, yes. You're right, she watches. You want to use agent-based modeling for micro systems. You want to use system dynamic modeling for macro systems. So if you're modeling the solar system, which is a macro system, and it's subjective to say what's macro and what's micro, but put it relative. It's a bunch of planets, you're modeling it. You're not going to model the individual particles in the sun to model the solar system. That would be silly. So in a macro sense, you use system dynamics. Now, when we have a guest on Friday, when we get agent-based modeling to the point where we can do billions or trillions of different agents, then we can start modeling like the particles in the sun and see the behavior of that, right? And any logic, anybody that's interested in modeling, any logic has a software package where it combines discrete time modeling, agent-based modeling, and system dynamic modeling. And there's been a few system dynamicists out there that have kind of experimented with having subsystems in their system dynamic model being agent-based modeling. So that's akin to, let's say, in Doug and I's, Douglas, the MMT macro trader, not Douglas Dwell. If our model, so if we had individual agents in the firms, instead of just modeling the firm sector, the non-financial firm sector, corporate and non-corporate altogether, we actually had individual firms in there reacting through an agent-based modeling and then plugging that module into a large system dynamic modeling. That could be the way going forward. It's extremely complicated to do, but guess what else is emerging in our modern system? AI that can handle all those operations, right? And AI and machine learning assisted by AI, right? That's going to be the golden age. Pretty soon people like me will be obsolete and AI will just be doing everything, and we'll all just, I don't know what we'll be doing. Live streams? We'll all have a live stream.
Live streams.
Okay, warning, we have an Austrian in the room. Now, Austrian financial duration theory. Have you, I don't know your name, but we'll just call you Austrian for now. Have you ever looked into Minsky's financial instability hypothesis? And is there any relationship between that and Austrian financial duration theory, which I'm going to, as much as well-versed as I am in economics, I haven't heard that before. Let me know, because that's kind of interesting. I see a huge Douglas, I see a huge synergy in one area between post-Keynesians and Austrians, and that's Minsky, right? A big synergy there. And I've often thought, if there's a model out there for Austrian economics and they don't like mathematical modeling for the reasons of human action and praxeology and all that stuff, but if there was one model that could be formalized in a qualitative way just to show the behavior, it's the Austrian business cycle theory. It could be done in a system dynamic model, and of course their postulate is that interest adjustments in the Federal Reserve adjusting interest rates cause the booms and busts, right? And you can model, here's the thing, system dynamics is still open to errors and assumption. You can create a structure, any structure you want, put any in assumptions you want, and model it. Does it match the real world? That's another question. But I've often thought about that to bring in more Austrians into the system dynamic field where, okay, let's not worry about quant, like actual dollars and cents. Let's not worry. Let's look at behavior, because I I've kind of read some snippets from Hayek and stuff that he was interested in that, the economy went into equilibrium. It was dynamic. It changed over time. God, that's a perfect use case for system dynamics. It's just such a perfect use case. But anyways, yeah, let me know Austrian financial duration theory. I'd be interested to know what that is. Even if we're going to go off here in 6 minutes because I've yapped a lot and people are probably getting tired of it. But put it in the comments after because that's something I would look into it. Douglas, you and all your Austrian friends, and I know you got a ton of them in the business here, and you'd never heard of that before?
No, that's a new one on me, and I'm equally fascinated to see, at what level they kind of push the envelope in the Austrian world on. Okay, well, it's not exactly a model, but it's a structure of thinking anyway, and kind of quasi model almost at that point.
I was talking the other day about malinvestment, and so somebody, I can't remember, on Twitter was making fun of a Austrian something, and I got in there. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like a meteorologist predicting yesterday or something like that, right? Just being a smart ass, right? And I didn't really take this question of malinvestment that seriously, but I thought about it afterwards, right? And what is so Austrians are very micro. They don't even believe in macroeconomics, really. They don't believe in aggregation, right? Because it's not real, right? So, and they also don't believe in policy by government because they don't like governments. But nonetheless, so their perception of malinvestment is, business investing in something that's stupid, right? Over time. And they do that because of low interest rates gives them the ability, which gets to kind of Minsky's theory in itself. And I thought about that. And I always say, why are you going to become an economist? Are you going to become an economist to be a historian of it? So in that case, you should work at a university and teach younger students the history of economics. Are you going to become an economist so you can forecast things? Because bottom line, what is economics for? It's to provide useful information to actors in the economic system of how to move forward, right? Like a meteorologist, should I take an umbrella tomorrow? What are the probabilities that I should take my freaking umbrella tomorrow? Because that's important to me. I don't want to get wet. I don't want to drown, right? Just like a person doesn't want to drown in the markets tomorrow. Although a lot of people do. And so I was thinking about that. And Jonathan Newman, I'm sure you've heard or seen him. He's I call him the three-headed modern Austrians out there. You got Bob Murphy. Bob Murphy.
Oh yeah.
You got Per Byland. I'm sure you've heard of Per Byland. He's a crazy guy. And then you've got Jonathan Newman, and two of them have really good beards. I notice Austrians have really good beards, and then Per Byland's does not have a beard. But anyway, so he chimed in and he's like, "Well, no, how do you really predict that?" And it made me think, okay, well, what's the use of describing malinvestment? Because so from a micro level, malinvestment, the idea of it is, okay, well, if you're a firm and you're thinking about an investment product, you make a business plan, right? And if you are a solid enough business plan and you go see a loans officer at a bank, if it's stupid, they're not going to give you a loan for that investment, right? So I thought about it and I'm like, well, malinvestment isn't an issue for forecasting. It's really actually an issue for a business plan, right? Invest in sound things, regardless of where the interest rate is at. You've got to invest in sound things. And then on the micro level, there's no such thing as malinvestment. And we see this all the time. We look at the dot-com bubbles. And so we could say like individual people that bought equities, that might have been malinvestment for them. But on the macro level, the free market, and remember, I'm a free market folk too, we found uses for the internet. There was no such thing as it. Look at where we are now. We're having this live conversation. I can do fancy things like this and press buttons, right? That's all through the .com. Right, that's where it came from. So there's no such thing as investment on the macro stage. And I thought, there are two types of economists, like theoretical thinking, historical thinking, and the normative, like, what you ought to do. economists. Okay, and there's a role for that in the academic institutions because you're supposed to foster thought about the underlying systems. But it was just another indication to me that it's like there's a lot you can throw out in economics because they ain't going to help you in the private sector as a forecaster like myself. I can't, well, investment means nothing to me. You get a business plan and you don't invest in stupid ideas, and you'll have either a consultant that you hire to help you with that process, or when you go for your bank loan, let's say you're a really small sole proprietor and you don't have the money for a consultant, I got to make, and the loans officer's like, there is not good return for you here, and I don't see any interest that you're going to be paying me from this, right? And so in that case, it's not an economic question, it's a consulting business plan perspective. And it's just something I thought about, about Austrian economics and, but it does relate. And so one final note for the end the show. So Austrian economists will say, well, the interest rate is low, so people will go and invest in things because the rate is low that don't have a big return. In the post Keynesian kind of Minsky sense, it's not the interest rate that drives it, it's actually demand that drives it. And then, like in our modeling, our structural modeling, what's that demand component? It's profits. So demand, more and more people are spending, firm profits go up. And Minsky postulated you get into a euphoric stage where your profits are so high that you'll actually invest beyond what you have in profits. You'll take out debt. This is where the interest rate will come back in. And you'll invest in things. And in the macro economy, like I said before, even a dot-com bubble era, somewhere down the line, that's repurposed those real resources into some productive means. So there's no such thing as malinvestment. So it's not a question of investing in capital that doesn't give a good return. What happens is you're investing with leveraged money. So now you're paying to the financial sector. And if the interest rate moves up, now you've got a cost that's reducing the profits you got from investing in that capital. And that's the way post Keynesians look at it. Look at it from a demand issue, not a supply issue because of the rate of interest by the Federal Reserve. So that's a bit of a nuance. But anyways, been 2 hours. Talked. I've got some real work modeling I've got to do. Douglas, you saved my ass today.
Happy to join you. Happy to join you, my friend. This is always a good time hanging out and talking this stuff. I could probably do it for 6 hours straight, probably. So yes, I'm a very sick individual.
Yeah, I could probably do that too. But then if I don't make any money, my significant other is wondering why I'm not kicking into the mortgage payments.
Right.
And she's actually a real human being, unlike me, where I toy around with all these different financial operations. She's a nurse, so she got a real job and actually takes care of people.
But hey,
yeah,
you did start a trucking company, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciated that. My dad drove over the road, and I'm like, man, I freaking love that story. I just admired that. I really do.
That was a tough go. So I was young. So I had started like I finished high school. I didn't go for a post-secondary. I went right into the workforce, and I was actually a mover. This is where a swamper. So a swamper is a guy that helps the driver. You sit in the passenger seat. And that's kind of where I triggered. And I actually, at that company, I learned how to drive 5 tons and some 10 tons. And I was like, oh, this is fun, but the moving sucks. Lumping heavy furniture in and out of a house, that sucks. But driving on roads and going for long drives, you're getting paid to drive, right? So it kind of triggered something in me. And then I got an opportunity to buy a truck from a guy that went out of business because of tax debt. It's a bane of my existence some years later. I should have seen it, but I was young and I'm like, oh, he's just selling me this truck. So now I've got my own little truck and I got some little side contracts with it. So owner operator working for myself, feel good. And I built it up over the years, learned that I should just lease my trucks instead of owning them. I'm not a mechanic. Learned I could write that off monthly instead of a capital depreciation over time. Monthly write-offs are way better. And so I did that for a number of years, and then I failed with tax liabilities. I found trucking is very hard to scale if you own it yourself. Now, big corporations can do it, but my issue so I got a white glove delivery service. So it would be sometimes a TV or a sofa, and you just take it in the house. So it wasn't quite moving or anything. So I got some big contracts with retailers here. And then I do some short regional kind of long hauls where I was transferring loads between Vancouver Island and Vancouver, the mainland. I love that shit. I love those loads. I would take those myself, but I found scaling it up. I had a lot of passion for when I started the one truck and I had a helper swamper. I had all the passion in the world and my service was really good. Like people would hire me again, call me up, right? As soon as you hire other people, you lose that kind of passion and engagement. And so scaling becomes harder and harder, right? And then, of course, having employees and the tax bill behind that, because here in Canada, I think down in the States too, you got to pay your share of taxes on your employees' behalf. I wouldn't do that all the time because there was months I was behind, right? And so I was using that as a line of credit. It came back to bite me. But boy, oh boy, as a 20-year-old, got it, I think 24 maybe. I kind of started there on my own and built up over 5 years, 5 trucks. I had 13 employees. What an experience it was for me in my 20s and into my late 20s about the responsibility of life of trying to just make it on your own, right? And I was brought up by my grandparents, and one of them, he was not my blood grandfather, but he was my grandpa, and I treated him like dad because I moved in with him when I was 4. He was an old Dutch guy, so he was a child during World War II, right? And so he had German soldiers in his backyard stealing his brother's bike. So he knew all about hard work. So I got a lot of that. I was lucky that I kind of got that hard work like boomer mentality where it's like everything was perfect. You had the one income family, you got your job, bought your house, and your wife stayed at home and you had your kids. He was a little bit before that where he realized the atrocities of this world and you have to make it on your own. And I was able to take what he had done and learn from that and then put it into practice. And it was quite the experience for me. And you would think, well, that would make you a very free market type guy where it's all about yourself and you got to make your own. But I realized there are always people around you that make that happen, right? And you're not even where you're a libertarian and you got your own private property. You are living in a community with neighbors around you, and you have to learn the best way to interact over time. So yeah, it was a hell of a learning experience.
Talk about a PhD in business, man. That's incredible.
Yeah. I guess it kind of beats an MBA in a lot of senses. But I freely admit I failed at the end. Running a small business is absolutely incredibly freaking hard, right? And so that's, I think, where I get the perspective of progressives going in on people like capitalists. I'm like, well, they're an actual person too. Like a lot of those capitalists, now some of them, Donald Trump got his money from his daddy, but there's a lot of wealthy people that started from the bottom with some luck and hard work, because I know about the hard work part. They built up that, right? And they liked the idea of employing other people because it brings them. I was satisfied. I felt proud of myself. I was employing other people, right? I didn't pay them high wages, but I felt good, like I was contributing, right? So I'm always skeptical of the argument, well, you got to stop those capitalists and you got to look out for the worker and be a real Marxist, or, I'm exaggerating, but the reality is they're interconnected. You need both capitalists and workers, right? And you just need a fair system where the quality is correct, right? But anyways.
Yeah, no, and when we see it big time right now, and especially like California, where in New York, there's the housing policy issues with, the landlords should freeze the rent. And it's like, well, yeah, you're asking a private business to provide a public benefit, and it's really, and I get it. I mean, we're just under a lot of stress right now, and it's part of the issue.
That's a tough go, being a landlord. So I never did it. So I did once in my life, and this was early when I was running the trucking company. I was still a renter at that time. I hadn't owned my own home. I was in my early 20s. I was getting there. And so I was a renter, and I got a really nice place. And the deal was I had to sublease the basement, right? So I signed into a lease agreement where I had to sublease. And it gave me an idea of how hard it is to be a landlord, because you got to remember the turnover. You're not always lucky to fill with the client you want to fill, right? So there could be gaps between monthly, and you're still paying a mortgage.
Yep.
Right. So it's an extremely hard business. Like, we know the ills of commercializing housing, but at the same time, young people can't afford to buy a home right off the bat. You got to rent for a few years, save your down payment, et cetera, et cetera. And there needs to be landlords out there to provide housing, right? But that's a hard gig, because, you're stuck with replacing the roof, the hot water tank, right? All the costs of home ownership that's outside of the monthly mortgage, right? So it's a tough go, and to suggest freezing what you can charge, meanwhile while your costs are rising, I'm not a fan of that either. So, anyways, I think that's it. I'm gonna pull up my stinger here. Gonna roll on out. Douglas, just stay on after the stream ends.
Right, we'll do.
Yeah. Anyways, guys, I'm going to do better next week. I'm going to have a video that works. I'm going to figure this out. But anybody that's stuck around, I'll look at the stats and see how bad it was. I'll try again next week. See you later.
You are now relearning economics.